Welcome to another edition of Ask David. Well, the growing conditions are pretty good, aren't they, at the moment? Plenty of warm summer sunshine, interspersed with some showers from time to time, and that means that the plants are growing well, the weeds are growing well, but you're also getting a few problems with your garden from time to time. Nothing's ever perfect, is it? So let's get on and answer some of your most pressing gardening questions. So at the top of the list this week is Sreeja, and she's asking whether it's possible to grow a common jasmine in a pot in a sunny position. Well, I think it's possible to grow it in a pot, but I would be more inclined to grow it into the ground. So plant it directly into the ground if that's possible. If it's not possible, then choose a large container, one about 50 centimetres across, a really big container, so that you can fill it with some soil but also some good compost, either bagged compost or homemade garden compost. Mix the two together and then plant into that, and because of that big pot, your plant will stand a much better chance of growing away well and covering a large area. As I say, it's best to plant directly into the ground because then the plant won't have to rely on you for all its water and all its nutrition, particularly if it's growing in a hot, sunny, south-facing position. The next question comes from Richard, and he's asking whether it's best to let the clippings fly when he's mowing the lawn or whether he should collect them into a grass box. I think here it depends very much on the time of year. So in the spring and again in the autumn, when the grass might be a bit longer and it's damper, then I'd be inclined to collect those clippings, take them away so that you don't get a spongy mass building up on the surface of the soil, which would also encourage moss to form. So collect them in the spring and in the autumn, and also whenever the clippings are quite long, I would collect them. The rest of the time I'd be inclined to let them fly because they will break down quite quickly, the clippings, particularly if they're fine and small clippings. They'll break down very quickly on the surface of the soil, on the grass, and return that nutrient back into the soil to keep the grass in good condition. The only proviso would be if it becomes very, very hot and dry, and then I'd be inclined to collect the very small clippings again, because if you're not careful, that can build up as a fibrous dry layer on the surface of the ground, and again that can cause sponginess to develop. Now Sarah's asking about flea beetle. She says that she's got it on rocket and also on some other brassica crops, and it makes little tiny holes in the surface of the leaf that don't look very nice. But to be honest, Sarah, I would pick the rocket, wash it thoroughly and then eat it, because it will taste just as good, even though it might not look perfect. But if you want to avoid flea beetle damage on the rocket, then sow it and then cover it with a layer of fleece. Cover it quite loosely, weight the edge of the fleece down, and that will discourage the flea beetle from being able to get to the leaves where they would normally feed. And at this time of year, in the middle of summer, you'll find that the crop will grow really well under that layer of fleece. Now Helen wants to know how to encourage her agapanthus to flower. She says that her husband has threatened to dig them up and throw them away if they don't perform this year. She's got some planted out in the open ground and she's got some in containers, and she wants some advice that will cover both of them. The key thing here is to make sure that you protect those agapanthus crowns during the winter, because they make their flower buds 1 year over winter and then they flower the following year with those buds, and they're just underneath the surface of the clump, so you need to protect that crown by covering them with a layer of well-rotted compost or composted bark to keep the frost out. Now there's not a lot you can do about that now, and fortunately we had a very mild winter, so hopefully those flower buds weren't damaged. But once the agapanthus start into growth, they need plenty of water to get them underway. They also benefit from being fed with a high potash fertiliser, a liquid high potash fertiliser, something like you would put on tomato plants. That will encourage them to develop really good flowers and perform really well. and I would do that feeding every 7 to 10 days. Use it at the dilution it's suggested for tomatoes. Apply it every 7 to 10 days. Give it a good slosh. Make sure that the compost is moist before you apply the liquid fertiliser, and that should make them flower their socks off. The only other proviso is remember that agapanthus need plenty of sunlight. Now the last question this week comes from Claire. She has a 15-year-old acer growing in a big pot. That must be something of a record really, to keep an acer in a pot for 15 years. She's got it growing in that pot, and she says it's starting to look a little bit shabby and sorry for itself, and she's wondering whether the best thing to do is to plant it out in the ground even though it's the middle of summer. Claire, that's exactly what I would do. I'd break the pot, smash the pot to get it out without damaging too much of the root system underneath. Before you start, give it a really thorough soak so that the shards of the pot come away from the root ball really easily. Dig a hole that's exactly the right size to accommodate that root ball. Plant it at the same level that it's been growing at in the pot, so keep the top of the root ball level with the surrounding soil, don't plant it too deeply. And I think that acer will love you forever because you've given it a really good chance of another life. There we go, another week's worth of questions answered. I hope that you enjoy your gardening week ahead, and I look forward to joining you next week to answer more of your gardening questions.